Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, based on from which part of the globe we have logged in. A very warm welcome to all of our panelists and our attendees. We at MSC are honored to host you all on this webinar. We hope to have a very insightful conversation on the financial diaries research and its future. I am Rahul Chatterjee, a senior manager in the Data and Insights team of MSC. I lead MSC's financial diaries research portfolio, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's discussion. We're going to have this discussion through a series of questions to each panelist. We plan to have the discussion with the panelists for around 1 hour, and then we will open the floor to the attendees for a question and answer session. All the attendees can post their questions in the chat box, and we will direct the questions to the respective panelists. And so let me introduce the panelists. We have a very esteemed panel with us today. Let me introduce the panelists one by one to all of you. Our first panelist is Stuart Rutherford. Trained originally as an architect, Stuart Rutherford later became interested in how poor people manage their money and how they might be helped to do it better. He has collected details of many financial devices in dozens of countries and has described this in his book, The Poor and Their Money. With David Hume of Manchester University, he devised and then led the first financial diaries research project in Bangladesh way back in 1999. Results from that first crop of financial diary exercises were written up in the book called Portfolios of the Poor, of which Stuart is a co-author. Stuart has also looked at money management for poor people from the point of view of a service provider, having established an MFI called SafeSave in Dhaka, Bangladesh in 1996, and has also worked as a teacher and a consultant. Stuart is currently running the Rishipara Daily Diaries project in Bangladesh, which is, I think, world's longest running financial diaries research. A very warm welcome to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Rahul.
Our second panelist is Dr. Daryl Collins. Dr. Daryl Collins is a co-author of that same acclaimed book called Portfolios of the Poor, and she is also a pioneer working at the intersection of finance and human vulnerability. Dr. Collins has recently founded Decodis, a tech-led social research firm that is focusing on creating new and innovative research methods. In the past 2 decades, Dr. Collins has built a broad portfolio of work with foundations, bilateral donors, governments, NGOs, and private service providers. Her work is grounded in a deep understanding of the lives of vulnerable communities across the globe, leveraging the experience of executing financial diary studies in over 10 countries. She spent the last decade as managing director and CEO of a niche consulting firm called BFA. She holds a BSc and an MSc in economics from the London School of Economics and a PhD from New York University. Very welcome to you, Daryl.
Thanks, Rahul.
Our third panelist is Ronak Kapoor. Ronak is a senior manager in MSC's Indonesia country program development domain. He is responsible for co-creating and implementing technology-enabled financial inclusion projects for public and private sector in developing economies. He has more than 13 years of experience in developing strategies to expand access to finance for the poor and advising financial institutions to implement innovative and cost-effective technology-enabled delivery channels. Over the years, he has advised more than 50 financial service providers and implemented collaborative financial inclusion projects with a range of stakeholders, including donors, multilaterals, private sector players, MFIs, commercial banks, and government. Ronak led MSC's Corner Shop Diaries and Small Farm Diaries and Agent Diaries project in Indonesia. A very welcome to you. A very warm welcome to you, Ronak. Very nice to have you.
Thanks, Rahul. Pleasure to be here.
And last but not the least, we have Anne-Marie Van Swinderen. Anne-Marie is the founder and managing director of Lift BV, a research company specialized in financial diary studies. Anne-Marie has been active in financial inclusion for over 3 decades. Initially, she worked on the supply side of microfinance, for instance, as a staff economist at BRAC, and supporting Vietnam's Women's Union setting up microfinance institution. Since reading Portfolios of the Poor, she decided her work on to the understanding of disadvantaged, undeserved groups and promoting widespread use of the financial diaries approach. She has conducted diary studies in 16 countries across 3 continents, demonstrating that things are seldom as you thought they were. Lift and Anne-Marie's motto is listening to the unheard. A very welcome to you, 'Anne-Marie'. 'Anne-Marie', 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 'Anne-
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Thanks. So we'll no more delay. Let us directly jump to the discussion. So I'll again start with a question to each of the panelists. Let's start with Stuart. So Stuart, how did you come up with the idea of financial diaries research? And has your approach to conducting diaries research changed since you started doing? And if yes, how?
Thank you very much, Rahul. Well, it all started, I guess, when Tony Blair's Labour government took power in 1997 after many years in opposition. And as a new government, they wanted to review many big policy issues. And amongst them, they wanted to look at the relationship between finance and development. And they wanted to do it at all levels, from international capital markets down to village level savings groups and so on. So the government called for research proposals, and it was Manchester University with some other partners that won the contract. And David Hume, who is a professor there, asked me to help him work on one of the subsections of this research, which was the re-examination of finance amongst poor and very poor people. By then, I had been living in Bangladesh for about 15 years, researching how poor people manage their money. Now, I had my own agenda. I wanted to challenge the belief, which in those days was common in the fast-growing microcredit industry, that without the help of MFIs, poor people had no access whatsoever to financial intermediation other than through rapacious moneylenders. So I suggested to David that we should interview poor households at length about their financial lives. It was David who suggested we do it as a diary. So David is the real father of the financial diaries methodology. He wanted to do it as a diary, or we wanted to do it as a diary, so that we would get insights into whether and how things change over time. So I ran some diaries in Bangladesh, as you already mentioned, in 1999-2000. And just a little later, a colleague, Orlando Ruthven, ran a similar set of diaries in India. Now, as for, you also asked me about whether our approach has changed. In the diaries that I've done, all of which have been done in Bangladesh, no, that's not quite true. I also did some in Burma at one time. But in the diaries that I've done, both the objectives and the methods have changed over time. See, the objective of those very first diaries had been to answer a very naive, simple question, which was, do poor people have financial lives? And if so, what are they like? The answer, as we now know, is that they do, and that on the whole, they tend to be complex. But there was no objective research to lead us to that understanding at that time. A little later, the objective of the Grameen Bank diaries that I did with MSc in 2002-2005 was much more specific and much more to do with evaluating a program than into inquiring about behavior of poor people. It was to examine how Grameen Bank clients reacted to some big changes that Grameen Bank brought about around about 2000, after nearly having gone bankrupt as a result of too great an emphasis on lending. Now, I'm still running diaries, and the objective of my most recent set of diaries is more like the very first ones. It's more to do with understanding behavior, understanding how people manage their money. But now I'm trying to get a finer grained and more in-depth understanding of financial lives amongst poor and very poor people. So consequently, as those objectives have changed, so the methods have changed. So for example, whereas in the very first diaries, we interviewed our diarists once every 2 weeks for a year and focused very sharply on their financial transactions. What I'm now doing is talking to diarists daily over a very long period, an ongoing period, in fact, which is now already more than 7 years. And we talk to them about all kinds of transactions. And we also talk to them about the way in which those transactions relate to their daily lives. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Rahul.
Thank you so much, Stuart. I'm sure that is very enlightening to all of us. So our next question is to Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, Lyft has been using diaries research for quite some time. What are your thoughts on the feasibility of the financial diaries research methodology and its applications to a wide variety of research?
Yes, it's definitely very feasible to cover other themes, subject matters. In fact, it has been done, and Lyft has done a couple of quite interesting studies. We looked at energy inclusion, looking at all the different types of energy people use, clean and not so clean, and also the health implications, and really tracking that day by day. How many hours do you spend in darkness? We've also looked at mixed livelihood strategies of young people, looking at how they were preparing for their careers, what their hopes were, how they're applying for jobs. And another example is rebuilding your life as a refugee. We've tracked several refugees in Uganda from different origins and see how they gradually settle into the host country. Actually, we have stopped talking about financial diaries. We like to use the word diaries because it's just so much more. We think diaries as a methodology is extremely useful and applicable for a number of themes, as long as the theme is genuinely complex. So it is worth talking about for a long time, and that there are issues that are fluctuating over time, so that the intensive repeat interviews make sense because you really track something. Also very suitable for sensitive and private issues. So if you sort of are able to talk about it immediately and are very open about it, that's maybe not a typical diaries theme, but it's really good in a diaries study that after 2-3 months, gradually people start to open up and sharing much more, personal things. So, and other candidates for diaries, we would think pregnancy would be a very good one. We would really like to do that, or first 1,000 days of a person. Agriculture, obviously, over the seasons, things are quite different. Over the years, also, there's a lot of fluctuation, and it is quite a complex theme. And for instance, nutrition would be a good candidate. Now, the advantages of diaries, the contribution of diaries, is that it shows the dynamics of someone's life, because you track people over time. You can see why people take decisions, how they respond to things, basically how everything is happening, including how change takes place. So you said in the announcement of this event that surveys are a snapshot. Yeah, surveys are like a photograph, and a diary study is like a video. And just like with the video, you can sort of see how people are moving, how people are reacting to each other. Maybe you can see the complexity of their emotions. The other contribution of diaries is that it is gradual. It's incremental. So you're learning something, and then you can start, you're getting some answers to questions, and you think of new questions, and you can sort of talk up and down. You get obviously the confidential thing. You can start touching it later. as an example, in Colombia, we did a study and it turned out that more than 10% of the respondents actually had their main income from money lending. And at the beginning, they reported a totally different main income. It took them 3 months to actually disclose this. Also, Diaries, it really is a two-way communication channel. So it's really good for participatory work. It's not only an organization asking questions to the participants, but the participants coming back with suggestions, with themselves saying, these are themes you should be looking at, or actively asking questions to the organization. And the real power of Diaries in Lyft's view is that it actually benefits the participants. It's an agent of change, and it's an emancipatory process that enables people to be more aware of their own situation, to have a better overview of everything that's playing in their lives. And it helps them to take more informed decisions. Because participants enjoyed participating in Diaries so much, at the end of a 1-year study, they're saying, please, can you continue? It is helping my life. It gives me calm in my head. I worry less. So in response to that, Lyft created Finbit. It's a technology with which different people can themselves track their lives. As long as they have a data coach to start how to use the technology, as long as they have access to a smartphone, anybody can report their diaries and become data empowered.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. I think I cannot agree more. So even in our experience also, we have seen in multiple countries that people told us that by getting these questions again and again, that actually makes them think about whether they want to change their financial life or their financial strategies. And also whenever we come up and go there and show them their data, so that also makes them thinking and change their strategies for the business. So absolutely. So this data is for the people, and I can't agree more. Thank you so much for your thoughts on this.
Rahul, could I just butt in very
yes,
briefly with one comment on what Anne-Marie
said?
Sure. Just a historical thing. Anne-Marie very interestingly said that she talks about diaries now, not financial diaries. And that reminds me that, in fact, any sociologist in our audience will know that sociologists have for many, many years, way back before we started financial diaries, used diaries as a sociological inquiry method. So the wheel is coming back full circle now. We talked about financial diaries because we were conscious that we were probably the first people to use diaries to focus on financial lives. Now Anne-Marie is opening it up again, and it does give us all a much bigger sort of historical resource of experience to look back on, because we can now look back at all those other kinds of sociological examinations that have been done over the years using diaries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuart. So it's really nice to see that we are coming back to the full circle and coming here. So really great. Now I'll come to Daryl. Daryl, you have managed both country-focused financial diaries research, like the Kenya Financial Diaries, as well as thematic area-focused diaries research, like the smallholder farmers diaries. How do these two differ from each other? And what points shall the researcher keep in mind while implementing both of these types of research?
Well, that's an interesting question. So the way, I suppose I'm not really doing diaries in the same way that I used to. Because Dakotas is all about doing tech-led data collection and analysis. But when I did diaries and did the smallholders versus country level diaries, there was really no difference, except we really found we needed a crop tracker. So we added in different pieces that were particularly important, and that crop tracker was really necessary to understand, especially how much of crops do people eat, how much goes to waste, how much gets eaten by pests, how much gets given away, in both the value and the amount. Now, in some ways, doing a crop tracker was a little bit difficult because inherent in the way that I've done diaries is that there's a special database that I've built and use. And there's an automatic calculation of sources of funds and uses of funds. So in that way, you can always tell when a cash flow is missing because those two things are not canceling each other out. When you have a crop tracker on the side, it sits outside of that. Now lately, I've been doing something that's much lighter touch. So I was always sort of a stickler for fine-grained detail. And now I'm going in the opposite direction where I'm pulling back out. And we've been experimenting at Dakota's with what I might call dipstick diaries. Much shorter time period, much more frequent interaction, but Dakota's uses open-ended questions. So we conducted some diaries in Ghana, and it was sort of people involved in a pilot of something called ECD, an exchange, a central bank exchange currency. And we were able to ask people about their cash flows in the last 3 days. And interestingly enough, we had expected to have this whole skip pattern of now tell me about the next one. Tell me about when and what type of mode, what did you do with it, how much was it? And they just told us everything all at once on the first question. And then we were able to use natural language processing to pick the whole thing apart. Now, what that means is that this can become lighter and faster and more agile and therefore cheaper. And that's kind of cool. There's probably some sacrifice in terms of fine-grained data. But what I really like about it is that you can intersperse some open-ended questions that might explain what people were thinking about behind the cash flows. You could intersperse questions about financial health. And in this particular example in Ghana, we asked people about their faith in ECD and why they have trust in the Bank of Ghana. And that was the most interesting thing of all, because on the most part, people were not really thinking of Bank of Ghana as a central bank. So you got a lot of raving about how they loved this product and how confident they were in it because they were thinking that the Bank of Ghana never showed up as a fraudulent bank in the news. So you get a more explanation than I'm used to in the way that I had done diaries in the past. And so we're really enjoying it, this whole new approach.
Great. So, I think if I want to pick up just one point from you, so this is basically the beauty of the diaries, that we have the financial data, which is hard quantitative data, and then we have qualitative data to understand the reason and the behavior behind each of those. And I think technology is helping us to bring both of them together. So I'll come back to you on that technology part in the next phase. But before that, I'll come to Ronak. So Ronak, you have conducted 2 diaries research projects on enterprises in Indonesia. One on the small corner shop and the one on small farms, which is a little bigger farms with employees of them. How do you think this helped the enterprises in improving their business? Has it also provided any inputs for enterprise owners to make efficient use of their own data for business development?
Yeah, thanks, Rahul, for the question. And first of all, I would like to say that I'm honored to be part of this stellar panel that includes Stuart, Darrell, and Anne. I mean, all of them are some of the global authorities in using financial diaries in development space. I'll share, I have not done 2 projects, but maybe 2.5 projects, if I include the agent diaries as well, which is in pilot stage. But yeah, I mean, part of it is answered by Anne-Marie when she was speaking about how the diarists become themselves aware about their own finances a little better. I mean, if you ask any small businesses about their finances, they will give you some broader idea on their revenues and expenses. But when they start actually recording some of these transactions and doing bookkeeping on a regular basis, they get into much finer nuances and insights, which otherwise, although it's at back of their head, but then when they get into the specifics after seeing those transactions, they're able to make much more sense of what is the trajectory of their overall business. And it's not that once the project ends, they go out of that habit. At least in our case, we have seen, around 40-50% of them continue to go on doing this because they do see value in this. Some of the diaries, we provide them with a standard format in which they need to record transactions. But what we have also seen is that they derive their own formats in the way in which they can interpret it better. So obviously, which means that they are seeing value in recording those transactions, and some of it is done very neatly in their books, although they might also do it digitally, and it might be a combination. The second aspect to this is the probing by the researchers. I think that also helps these diarists quite a lot. I mean, one of our diarists in Makassar in Eastern Indonesia, because of the probing done by the researcher who would visit them almost 2 to 3 times a week and trying to figure out why, these numbers are not matching up, he could uncover a fraud being committed by an employee he trusted a lot over the last 5 years, and he was siphoning off some of the money. So that was an eye-opener for him. And I think the third aspect is also being comfortable on the digital tool. So some of the diarists to whom we have given phones, and they are starting to use those phones for recording those transactions. Of course, the first 2 months are painful to just make them understand why this data, why we are asking this so frequently. But once they get settled, they obviously also get comfortable using digital tools in general. So we have seen our diarists, once they've gone through this process, they develop more confidence, and then they can also start using, WhatsApp, start registering them on platforms to sell their products and services. So yeah, they do get more confident in using digital tools. I think those are some of the points that I can think of from the limited experience that we have conducting financial diaries in Indonesia.
Thank you so much, Ronan. So I think this point is really important that many of them did it for the first time as a formal bookkeeping exercise, and that actually may be helping them to understand their business finance in a better way and use that to take some decisions to improve their business. I think that is really interesting. Thank you so much. So Stuart, I'll again come back to you. So you are leading one of the world's longest running diaries project in Rishipala. So that is going on for more than 7 years. How did you use this opportunity when the COVID-19 pandemic started? Could you leverage the Rishipala Daily Diaries project to generate new insights about the impact of COVID and how people coped with it? And what future plans do you have with the Rishipala Diaries project to unpack the non-financial aspects of the lives of the diaries? So if you can tell us about that.
Okay, thank you very much, Rahul. Yes, let me try to answer that one. During the time that the Indian diary researcher Rajalaxmi Kamath, while she was running diaries in Karnataka in southern India in 2008-2009, there was an informal ban on MFI loan repayments broke out, which eventually led to the famous South Indian microcredit crisis of around that time. Because she was doing the diaries, Rajalaxmi was therefore able to compare her diarist's money management behavior before the ban, the repayments ban, during it and after it, and report on it in real time. So I mention that because a similar thing happened to us in 2020, right? When the COVID-19 crisis broke. We had started our current daily diaries with 60 diarists in 2015. So we already had a rich set of data that enabled us to compare their pre-COVID income, expenditure, borrowing, savings, etc., with what happened both during and after the COVID outbreak. So we could see some overall trends, and we could notice differences between individual diarists and between groups of diarists. As an example, we quickly saw that the single most common coping strategy when the lockdowns were imposed and all economic life stopped was to cut back really severely on all but essential expenditure, which we might have expected, and to rely on reserves of cash held at home, which turned out to be bigger than we had previously supposed. So that was an interesting learning. By the way, anybody who would like to have more details about what we found out through the diaries about COVID and can find them in a paper that's referenced in the chat here. Something else that we've discovered since things have started getting back to normal is that in this post-COVID period, the fact that they had a break from contact with their MFIs because the government told the MFIs to close down, stop collecting repayments, stop giving out loans for several months in 2020. So that enforced break by the government seems very strongly to have caused some of our diarists to rethink their relationship with their MFIs. And many of them have, as a result, either taken fewer or taken smaller loans. So this is something that, as we keep going, we're going to continue looking at to see whether that's really true. And we're going to start asking our diaries direct questions about that. So to answer your question, yes, I think we did succeed in leveraging one of the benefits of having long-term before and after data. I think we were less successful in the other obvious advantage that we potentially had, the advantage of being able to disseminate high quality information about the crisis in real time for use by decision makers. Now, I think that failure was largely down to the fact that we weren't ambitious enough to discover and exploit the best channels for that kind of dissemination. We ran a special page on our website, which we updated very quickly and very frequently, and we tweeted very frequently, but that was about all that we did. I think we could have done more, and that is an area that I would like to see other diary keepers explore in the future. It's an area of future development for diaries, I think. As far as we're concerned, as far as our future plans go with these Trishipara diaries, these daily diaries we're doing at the moment, we just intend to go on looking for fresh ways to unpack insights from the data. Right now, for example, we're running a page called Lives Day by Day, in which we link the transactions of selected diarists with their own stories about their daily lives on that day and about what the transactions mean for them. Again, you can see this on another link that's displayed in the chat channel. Some of our diarists in Trishipara may shortly be involved in a project that will look at whether innumerate people can be taught how to keep their own diaries, and if they can, what effects, if any, that has on the way they manage their money and on the way that they relate to their financial partners. That's coming up perhaps next year. Meanwhile, we're always looking for inspiration from other diary keepers, such as my fellow panelists today. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Rahul.
And thank you so much, Stuart. I think this is very, very interesting and a lesson for all of us, the diary keepers, to maintain this kind of a process. And we also really look forward to that oral diaries project, where we'll try to see how the innumerate people can work on their own diaries. So we are really happy to be a partner with you
Yes.
on this one. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we'll come to Anne-Marie now again. So Anne-Marie, Lyft has been involved in a global project called Small Farm Diaries. And of course, our joint Corner Shop Diaries project across 11 countries. With that experience, what do you believe will be or should be the role of financial diaries research in the future?
Yeah, so as maybe I should start, Lyft has done financial diaries projects in 16 countries, and even with more than 15,000 participants so far. And looking back on the last 10 years, we see in the field of financial inclusion, there's sort of two camps, the RCT or the randomistas and the diaries camp. And obviously the RCT has been the bigger one, has been getting all the funding and has been widely recognized. And Lyft from its start has wanted to get diaries there on an equal footing of the RCTs. And I want to say that this moment has come. I think diaries is now widely recognized. We see more and more organizations, self-respecting organizations, using this approach. Any large program has at least some financial diaries or other diaries component. So diaries has come out of its niche, has come out of the shadow, and is definitely mainstream. Now we expect, and we are already seeing this happening, two big features. The first one is that diaries more and more are used for multiple reasons. So it in one go, it is doing market research, it's doing customer satisfaction, it is tracking it's doing the monitoring for a program, product development. Some of this can be sequential, it can also be simultaneous. And impact measurement is a really big one coming up. We are doing 2 RCT diaries combination studies at the moment. We also see that one central data collection mechanism can serve many organizations. So you have like 5 MFIs all using the same group panel of respondents, and the central bank even coming in some places, the statistical bureau of the country. So that way, obviously, you share resources, and for some organizations, the questions can be very different, but it can still be using that central mechanism. And the second development, and that's the one that excites us most, as I was just saying already, is that diaries more and more is serving actually the participants rather than the organizations. I mean, for us, we have 3 clients, we have organizations as clients, we have the data collection group is a type of a client, but the participants or the FinBit users for us is the most important thing. We think that big change is going to happen there. We consider people keeping their diaries an empowering process in itself. You become aware of yourself, you become more confident, and you're more able to express yourself to other people. We like to call it data empowerment. The most vulnerable people are the ones who have least data, are the ones who have most erratic mobile phone data. If an algorithm is going to assess a loan applicant, the most vulnerable are not going to pass that algorithm because there are no data for them. Now here they can build their own data that they know are the truth, and they can start actively use it. We have, I think I just said already, in Ethiopia, there's been one participant who's gone with their data stick of all their transactions, showing the tax office, you're charging me far too much. Another one has actually assessed the value of his company for an investor who wanted to take some shares in his company. And obviously for loans, it's very important for people to have data. So that is what we expect. We hope to get 50,000 Finbit users per country. We're aiming for 10 countries in the next couple of years. And obviously the people who are themselves using the Finbit, they can show other people how to use it. They will share with other people what they get out of it. And we think this thing will really grow big, and it will truly give a voice to the unheard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And I think this is a very important point that this Diaries research can actually empower people to help them with their own data. I think that's really, really important for all of us diary keepers and enthusiasts to remember. Thank you so much. I will now come to Ronak. Ronak, you are managing a Diaries research pilot in Indonesia on cash-in, cash-out agents. Why did you opt for a Diaries approach for this one? And how do you think the insights from the agent Diaries research will be useful for the policymakers, regulators, and financial service providers? And what future prospect do you see for this?
Yeah, so I think so across the globe, actually, we have done a lot of studies on agent networks. And I think Anna is one of our biggest studies, which we did in over 11 countries. And these are quantitative surveys. They have their own value. They give us a good snapshot of what's the current state of agent networks. How do you benchmark one market with the other market, and some of the sustainability parameters. Of course, we also combine qualitative research along with these quantitative research, which also are useful. But then these surveys do have some limitations in the kind of information that they can sort of provide you. And often we realize that we have come across these questions from regulators and service providers on certain nuances of agent business, which probably cannot be answered through these surveys. And I'll come to those examples. So basically what Financial Diaries in sort of agent business helps us to uncover is what are the sort of practices an individual agent has, what are their coping strategies, and most importantly, if you see in many geographies, these agents are not only doing DFS. The DFS probably in most cases is their secondary business. The primary business, which is a non-DFS business, is their main business. And while managing the DFS operations, there's a lot of funds which are moving between these two businesses, and it's difficult to sort of make sense out of it unless and until we are not collecting that granular data through an instrument or through a methodology like Financial Diaries. Because how an agent manages these two pots of money is critical in terms of their success in their DFS business. So, for example, things like how much cash or digital money do we have in the beginning of the day, and how does these balances keep changing during the day? What happens when agent falls short of these funds? Does he uses the cash from the non-DFS business, or does he uses the cash flows from the DFS business to actually make payments to suppliers in the non-DFS business? And to be honest, there are no right or wrong answers to this. Every agent has developed their own sort of style, and it depends on individual agent circumstances and the way they manage their business. So diaries can help us inform and start making sense of how agents manage their DFS business. And I think the insights coming out of that, even things like what sort of customer segments do they serve, and insights into those segments, which could be a combination of questions that you ask as part of the Financial Diaries, or it could be some sort of qualitative interviews which are tagged along. Just even if I just ask them to record, the basic demographics of the customer who visited and the kind of transactions that they did, I think that itself is a lot of, rich data that can inform us, gender aspects of how, let's say, women agents are dealing with their customers, what sort of customer segments are coming to them. And I think for the policymakers and service providers, I think our intention is to take these insights to them and and suggest them ways and means to better manage and support their agent networks, and to tell them that one size fits all sort of an approach does not work, and there is a lot of nuances and contextual underpinnings that they need to sort of consider while supporting these agents. So I think these are some of the things I think in future we would like to scale up our Agent Diaries project in Indonesia. We would also like to consult more deeply with the policymakers on the kind of hypothesis, even the service providers, that they would like to test. So like Stuart was talking about earlier, one could be that you generally do an exploratory research through a financial diaries methodology, but other could be also that very targeted hypothesis that you want to test. And I think that is those are some of the things that we would like to do in future.
Thank you so much, Ronak. So I completely agree with you that the potential of using the diaries research for Kiko agencies have immense potential, and very great to hear that you are planning to do that at scale in near future. Thank you so much. So now we have come to our last question, and that is to Daryl. Daryl, diaries research is a costly and resource-intensive affair. We know that you have been experimenting with using technology to optimize on resource use, and you have already touched upon it in the when you were talking, answering to your last question. But what lessons have you learned from this exercise by using and experimenting with technology for diaries? And how do you foresee the role of technology in the future of diaries research?
Well, let's see. I mean, one of the big reasons why Dakotas is focused, and, you know, I started Dakotas when COVID first hit and I couldn't go into the field. And I thought, well, how am I going to do my work? And so I joined with a group called Commonwealth in the US to track and conduct financial diaries across US households to understand how the US households were coping with the first few months of COVID. And that's when I discovered the power of voice, because Commonwealth also said, well, we need you to make the whole methodology cheaper and more agile. So what I found through that power of voice is that people would use a different type of voice when talking about different things. Sometimes they'd be very powerful. Sometimes they would be more sort of reticent to talk about different topics. But then the other thing that I realized is, well, if you're collecting people's data using interactive voice recording, well, you could suddenly do 1,000 interviews all at once, because it's not a person. You can have a very specified voice, certainly in the language of the respondent, but also in the accent with a matching gender and using sort of a nice colloquial voice. And so suddenly you can really scale this thing up. And what really sort of caught my imagination is I remember pretty soon after Portfolios of the Poor came out, so Sendhil Mullainathan, you know, who's a very well-known and very well-respected behavioral economist from Harvard, called me and said, so how much would it cost to do diaries for 1,000 people? And I was just like, now, see, if you're MicroSave now, you can do that pretty easily. But back then, I thought, what are you, crazy? Like, it would cost so much. And there are situations where you really need that large sample size. So, for example, you know, yet it needs to be a reasonable cost. So what this tech-led stuff is about is being able to really increase the sample size of qualitative data and diaries type data, but keep it within a reasonable cost and try to bring down the cost. Here's a great example. I'm in Tokyo at the moment, and ironically, I am speaking at a nutrition conference, because I was on a panel where people were talking about the affordability of healthy food. Now, anyone who's done diaries will know, or I don't know, a lot of us in this chat will know that low-income people, when they get a lump sum of money, sort of on a monthly basis, and they do their big shop, that's when they'll probably buy slightly better food. And then they'll run that money down, and just before they get their next sort of payment or what have you, they're really down to a starch. And that's pretty interesting, because the nutritionist and those who are thinking about affordability aren't thinking about that time series. They aren't thinking about that like super regular way of eating. And what I don't know as an economist is, well, is that okay for your body, or is that suboptimal? So yet prices of food fluctuate like crazy in their hyperlocal. So in order to really unpack that problem and understand, okay, well, what are the nutritional deficiencies? You have to look at a large sample size in order to see a larger. You need more breadth of those regions. And that, I think, these days is kind of what I'm going for. Something like a problem like that, where you're tracking literally food and money at the same time, both high frequency data, but different types of data, and answering a really big problem like, what are the daily nutritional deficiencies of different low-income people, and what do you do about it, and how expensive is that solution going to be? And that's a problem that really needs precision.
I think this is really interesting, and it's really amazing, like how technology can actually help you to like achieve something which we actually thought impossible. I think maybe a couple of years back, and the pandemic also kind of helped us to explore those potential that we already have using technology. Really thanks, Daryl. So I think we have come to the end of the discussion. So I will try to quickly summarize the various points that you all have mentioned. So the Diaries research has evolved over time, both in terms of its objective as well as how it was being done, which methods it was taken. And now if we talk about the various thematic, so it is not anymore just financial diaries, it is more of like diaries research, because we are using it for enterprises, for agent network, and then for energy usage, for health, for nutrition, for livelihood, for refugees, and for whatnot. And to achieve this huge, like various very diverse portfolio of our respondents, and so we are using technology to achieve that, as well as very specific tools, like Daryl mentioned about crop tracker while doing a diaries research with the farmers. So various these tools as well as technology is actually helping them. And the diaries research itself is being just not as an exploratory research, but also being used for impact evaluations, as well as and if we talk about monitoring, learning, and evaluation, I think it adds a lot of value to the L, that is the learning component, because going beyond traditional monitoring and evaluation methods and adding a lot of learning to the programs as well, implementers, as well as the other people. Now, this diaries research is also empowering the people by showing them their own data and using that to improve their business and improve their life. And when we're talking about using technology, so there is also a nice trade-off that we have to do between how granular a data that we need, and also if we need to scale up the sample size, or we need to go into the more detail about the why part of the various financial decisions that people are making, like the kind of work that Daryl is doing on that aspect. And I think and this diaries research especially, and the world actually needs some long-term diaries research which actually help us to see the very large changes that happens, like the Rishipara diaries, the role that played to understand the changes that happened in the people's life before the pandemic, after the pandemic. I'm sure that Stuart mentioned that we could not disseminate it at that time, but those learning I think will remain invaluable, because all of those are recorded in the Rishipara Diaries project website, and I think it will remain invaluable for all the policymakers and financial service providers to see how a certain aspect, a certain thing like a pandemic can change people's life and their behaviors. And I would also, I think one important point is that these diaries can also be used as a useful tool to test hypotheses from the policymakers and the financial service providers to see how exactly that can help. And so, yeah, I think those are the few takeaway points for me. And a very interesting discussion is actually going on in the chat box. So even after the regular questions, let me come to that. And so there have been some questions, and some of you are already answering that, but let me reiterate those questions to all of you and also see what you have in your mind. So there is one question from Michael Universe that in terms of empowering respondents with their own data, are there any results of respondents continuing to collect their own financial data for decision making after a financial diaries project has been completed? Example, uptake, duration, etc. So I will talk a little about it, and then I'll request the panelists to answer. Yes, we have seen it, like Graham has already mentioned in answer to this question. So in very recently in Kenya, we have seen that there the diaries that we are running. So it was a two-phase diaries that we started with 100 sample and then took a subset and continued them for a month, and then we took a subset of 30 and continued them for still continuing with them for a period of 1 year. And we have actually seen that many of them with whom we discontinued in the phase 2, they are still using the diaries, but in some different, maybe in the similar format or in some different format, and they are still recording their daily financial and business transaction related to the business because they are finding it really useful. And what is your experience, Daryl, and Mary, Ronak, Stuart?
Yeah, shall I go first? First of all, we have quite a sizable number of people in South Africa who completely report in technology themselves. So they have coaches helping them with the technology only, and that can be discontinued for most of them. From the small firm diaries, there is a portion of people who do continue. It's more in Nigeria than in Ethiopia at the moment. But yeah, that whole program was not designed towards that goal at all. So that we've also held back giving them the technology until all the data was complete from the researchers. So yeah, we are very optimistic that this is definitely possible, but it requires some experimentation and training material and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. Any other insights from the panelists? Or yeah, okay. Then I'll move to the next question. So this question is from Divya Alex. I think this is a very interesting question. So in these low-income households, women often are not aware of the financial transactions done by the men in the households. So how was this challenge overcome in the Diaries project?
So I can jump in here.
Sure.
This is a super cool question. It's so true that you need to oftentimes get the woman sort of by themselves and get the man by themselves. Now, I found my field researchers were not able to do this so easily. I mean, there needed to be kind of a natural reason why we wanted to interview them separately. Otherwise, it would create all sorts of friction. But in those diaries where we could, and usually we could do this on a subsample, you absolutely saw women doing things that were not exposed to the men in the household. Now, the way that we unpacked that was not so much that it was about women sort of doing things maliciously on the side. It was more that they were sort of this lender of last defense. So in other words, if everything went pear-shaped in that household, it was the women who were going to need to step up. And so they almost always had some little pile of savings And if you talk to them more about that intention, it's because they knew that that would be their job. Their job is playing defense in the household. And they wanted to make sure that that little pocket of savings or those little financial transactions or relationships could be held on the side and not used too quickly or too early.
Thanks, Daryl. And Mary Stewart, would like to add anything on this one, like how you were managing this challenge?
Yeah, I think I can.
Yes, Ron.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Ron first.
No, so I think in Indonesia, I think the dynamics is slightly different than other sort of South Asian context. There are actually a lot more women who are managing micro enterprises, and so when we onboard them, one of the things that we do check is that whether they have sort of complete sense of their business transactions or not. We did struggle with some of the older women who were very skilled at actually the technical aspects of their business, but not so much on the financial aspects. And but I think in these situations, I think role of our field researchers became very important. We had to actually train them in terms of how to help these women extract or get some of the information and probe them a little more. And at the end of the day, we also saw that some of the family members would also sort of support. So there would be at least one person from the family who would sort of fill in the gaps in case the field researcher is not able to get the complete information from these women. But yeah, I mean, at least in Indonesia, a lot of our diarists were women, and they did pretty well, both in terms of recording transactions and articulating about their finances.
Thank you, Ronald. Stuart and Mary, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I would like to share that from the start, we have actually always done the diaries with individuals, not with households. The first big studies we did were with young people who were, sort of exiting one household, building their own household. So it wasn't very clear where the household started and ended. And we continued like that because we find it very, very revealing regarding the intra-household transactions. So actually, it helps to see the relationships within the household. And if you want to empower people, it is much better for them to report about their own specific life rather than talk for other people in the household.
Also, just to add to it, also from our experience in Indonesia, some of the diarists, women diarists who were not able to actually be very articulate during the initial stages, they did pretty well actually 3 months, 4 months into the research. So then they knew what are the expected questions, what sort of maths is there in terms of probing questions that might come from the researchers. So yeah, they started becoming more aware about their business as well.
Great. So I can see one more very interesting question here. This kind of diaries research can really help financial service provider to better design more impactful products. And we can also see that such exercise could also generate data on clients' need for business support, etc. But this kind of exercise demand institutional capacity at the level of the financial service providers. And for institutions which are working in the low competition, this is less of a priority. So how can we encourage the stakeholders to invest more on this kind of research and use that for developing their products and services?
I can maybe give my opinion, because when it comes to financial institutions, especially if I talk in the context of agents, actually, I don't think that financial service providers are doing a great job, even in terms of understanding their own transaction data. So they have the luxury of their own quantitative transaction data that is sitting with them. If they could sort of do some preliminary analysis on that, and then sort of develop certain hypotheses and do small scale sort of diaries projects to sort of understand this, because a lot of them do have a field team, right? I mean, and they can be tasked to do this sort of task as well. But I think financial providers are sort of strategically positioned to do this. And a lot of time, I think you would see a lot of the fintechs are actually doing financial diaries and selling that data to financial service providers to give loans or to design financial products. So I think there is a value. We have interacted with some of the large financial service providers as well in Indonesia. And some of the questions and concerns that they have probably can be answered through a financial diaries. But before that, they should do some sort of a basic analysis of the transaction data itself.
I
Stuart,
actually have
what do you think? Yeah.
Oh,
Daniel.
sorry.
Yes, Daniel. Yes, I was
No,
continuing.
Oh. Stuart, do you
Go
want to
ahead,
go ahead?
Daryl. Go ahead, Daryl.
I have a cute story about this. So when I was with BFA, we were doing financial diaries for ICICI, right? And it was to develop a savings product. And ICICI was not too interested in our financial diaries. They were like, enough with the demand side research, you're killing me. And lo and behold, we handed over a whole bunch of cash flow data and said, all right, here, fine. Here's data, do what you will. Lo and behold, they used that data to create a loan product, but they used the cash flow data to price it. And we had no idea that they actually ended up using it until we went back a year later and they said, oh yeah, that spreadsheet. Hey, we use that. So I must admit, I think that, getting the cash flow data out into the public so that certainly financial service providers, but lots of other types of providers to these households have a sense of financial flows and behaviors and amounts, because that type of information really, it's hard to get the entire portfolio that looks like that, not just their own product. So I think the trick here is really getting literally daily cash flow data out into the public space.
Thanks, Daniel. Yes, Stuart.
No, I just, one comment is that on the one or two occasions when I've sort of talked to financial service providers about diaries, what I've noticed is that if they take the plunge, and if they do some diaries themselves, or if they get involved in diaries, quite often they get really interested. And whether or not that leads to better product design, I don't know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But it does at least show that they can be inspired by suddenly getting a new understanding of the kinds of people that are involved at the demand end of their business. And that must be a good thing.
Right. Very correct. Thanks, Stuart. We have a question.
One quick
Sure.
comment, Rahul. I think in Indonesia also we had this example where we actually took the service provider, the financial service provider, to meet one of these diarists, and obviously we showed them the data and they became interested and they wanted to actually go and after the project had ended, and they saw some of the products that these digital products that these diarists were selling, and I think immediately after that they wanted to actually institutionalize a very locally offered Wi-Fi coupon and sort of scale it up. So now I don't know whether those insights came from financial diaries, but I think once we shared the data, they became interested, and it led to they nationally scaling up a product which we thought was would not be of so much of an interest for them. And this is one of the largest fintechs in Indonesia.
It's very interesting. Actually, also for this Wi-Fi coupon, we have a blog that we have wrote to cover that aspect. So this was part of the Corner Shop Diaries effort. So I'll put the link also here in the chat box very soon. So we have a question from Juan Fernando Gomez, who is from the World Bank and a researcher at Georgetown University. Actually, two questions. The first one is, have you considering diaries for people understand subjective aspects of their lives, like self-esteem, support network, etc.? And second question is, how could we adapt this methodology to the context of Latin America? I want to mention just one point for the first question. We are running research in Bangladesh with around 500 women entrepreneurs, which we are calling a women business diary. So there we are trying to understand a 360-degree view of the women entrepreneurs. Along with covering their financial life, we are also trying to understand their personal life, their interaction, the power dynamics in the family, their business, how they are managing their business, and how the external factors are affecting them. So we are here, we are trying to understand these aspects, what you have mentioned, Yuan, about the self-esteem, support network, etc. How we are doing it? One, we are doing it through whenever we are going to meet the diaries and conducting qualitative interviews. We are trying to probe on these aspects. And secondly, we are working very closely actually with Daryl to use IVR-based technology to ask open-ended questions to these diaries and capture these aspects of how this how is their self-esteem or their support network actually help them to grow and understand. So that is some effort that we are making. And now, yeah, I'll make it open to our panelists to answer these two questions.
Yeah,
Thanks. I wanted to say, Anne-Marie, you've done diaries in Latin America, haven't you? I had done some in Mexico, but I think you've done way more.
Yeah, actually, first on the first part of the question, we actually always ask people about how they rate their happiness and their level of stress. We find that very important, and we have always tried to find a relationship between savings and stress. We haven't yet found that correlation, but it's still very interesting to track. And with refugees, we've also tracked their sense of empowerment or sort of control in their lives, and that they're feeling being useful, and also their relationship with the host community. So I think basically any indicator that you want to research, you can include it in a diary study, and most people really enjoy talking about that kind of things. And yeah, we are very happy to do more diaries, particularly in Colombia. That will be easier, and in Bolivia, I think there's some very good potential partners in this session as audience.
Oh, I wanted to mention we're going to start working with indigenous communities in Ecuador, and working with Fundación Capital to do some diaries there. Now, I kind of love that because of the language element. I think it's going to be really, really interesting. And the supposedly sort of financially off the map group, let's just see exactly how financially off the map they really are. So I think there's actually a lot going on in Latin America, as Anne-Marie was saying.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks, Daryl. Yes, any more questions from the audience? Please feel to ask. I think we have around 9 minutes more. Any questions to our panelists? Yeah, we have another question from Hena. So politics and culture have really great impact in having genuine information from respondent side in related to financial diaries and the most challenging things in disclosing their financial matter. How these were managed in qualitative research and quantitative research. Financial diaries vastly about financial terms, but having reliable information more about the external factors. Please tell us your experience in coping up with this. So, as it is not directed to any particular panel, so any of you want to take it up?
I'm not sure if I fully understood. Can you make a rephrasing of the question?
I think I understand what he means.
Okay,
So, like,
okay.
to what extent are you also tracking what is the COVID situation really, so that you can see the answers in the context of the developments? Actually, the small firm diaries in all the countries where we've been working has been not just faced with COVID, but with increased levels of violence, insecurity, political issues. In Ethiopia, we've done this study throughout and basically civil war. But also in Colombia, it has been extremely violent and unstable, and in Nigeria, but practically all the countries. And I think Henok has a really good point. We should always include questions about what political influences are there, or regional things. For the small firm diaries, there is this question, a repeat interview every week, where we're asking the respondent about any kind of context issues, availability of supplies, changes in prices, that kind of questions. Yeah, that actually the big thing with COVID wasn't just the illness, but the supply chain started to fail. Things didn't arrive anymore, and now with the war in Ukraine, that has really changed the context so much.
And I think he was also mentioning that the relative perspective in qual and quant. So how we are balancing these two aspects in diaries research, the qual and the quant part.
I think, yeah, I mean, some of it is complementary as well. I mean, because when we do these qual interviews as part of financial diaries, we already have a lot of information through the regular data collection that we are anyways doing. So we can, it also helps the researchers to probe a lot better on the qualitative side. On politics and culture, I think the point that has been mentioned, some of it is taken care of by the fact that the field researchers also come from the same culture, I mean, mostly. So they do understand, and at least in Indonesia, we have seen that the regions are very different. I mean, we have this research in 4 locations and the culture actually varies, but because these field researchers are also from the same area, then they are able to sort of understand and appreciate it, both the politics as well as the culture. So, yeah.
Yes, that's been our experience too. These long-term, these 7 years diaries we're doing in History Power at the moment, owe much of their success to the fact that our data collectors are from the same villages where we are collecting the data, and are not people with academic degrees, but are people with high school passes at the best, but who therefore speak the same language, feel the same feelings, live among, marry among, have their social life among our respondents. So on the question of the relationship between the quantifiable and the qualifiable, for us, the framework are the numbers. The framework is what money came in today, what money went out today. That's a framework. Once you've got the confidence of the diarist, that's a framework that you can use to get reliable data. On that, you build over time your relationship with the diarist, which is a relationship that is a social one, may become a psychological one. It's one in which you begin to get deeper and deeper understandings of why they made these transactions, what these transactions mean in their life, and in that way build a much more comprehensive picture of the kinds of people that you're dealing with.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Ronak. I think we have another question on if we have any similar diaries research experience in the North Africa and the West Africa. So any of us has worked in the North Africa and the West Africa region on diaries?
I've mentioned these sort of dipstick diaries in Ghana on ECD. But those are the only diaries I've done in West Africa. They were surprisingly and blindingly easy, which was really, really shocking. I thought that there was going to be all sorts of problems with connectivity and understanding and opening it up. And this particular region and this particular experience happened to be really good, but I think it's because there was this really wonderful Bank of Ghana employee who had everybody's confidence and worked really, really hard to help us out with our sample. So it's amazing. It's all about the people on the ground, and I am incredibly jealous of Stuart's researchers, I tell you.
Great. Sure. So I think we are almost at the end of the time. It's almost at 5:30 in the Indian time, and I think so we have a lot of questions and a very, very insightful discussion, I must say. And so I would like to now conclude the discussion by thanking all of you. Thanks a lot to all the panelists and all the attendees for joining the webinar. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Stuart. Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, Ronak, for the insightful discussion. And thank you for all the attendees for asking the thought-provoking questions and be a part of this discussion. I mean, thank you so much. Have a great day, and goodbye, and see you soon.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.